On this episode of Reframing Justice, we're on the cusp of Election Day 2020, and you're either voting or you're one of the 6 million disenfranchised Americans who are locked out of democracy because of felony convictions. Today, we'll talk to Ronald Simpson-Bey of JustLeadershipUSA about efforts across the country to reinstate voting rights for people with a conviction history.
But it's clear that voting rights appears to be part of the package of a pro-social behavior that is linked to distance from crime.
And we'll introduce you to AFSC Arizona's new organizer, Enrique Olivares-Pelayo, who had his voting rights restored just before this year's voter registration deadline.
To have that restoration and to see a piece of paper saying that my birthright had been restored to me was a deeply moving experience. It was emotionally impactful.
We believe that no one is disposable. We believe in healing and accountability over punishment. We believe that strong communities are safe communities. We believe in solutions that repair trauma and honor the humanity of all people. We are reframing justice. Hey y'all, it's been a while, but we are back. Thank you so much for being here on the new Reframing Justice, our first episode, in fact, here on YouTube on this election day. Thank you so much for joining us on this day, being in a space with folks who share your values. Today we're actually going to be talking to two gentlemen who had their voting rights taken from them at one point because of felony convictions, but have since had those rights restored and are no longer disenfranchised. And so we're really excited to have the both of them join us today to talk about those experiences and the work that they're currently doing. Joining us first is actually Ronald Simpson-Bey, the Director of Outreach for JustLeadershipUSA, which is a New York-based organization of formerly incarcerated, directly impacted people built by those folks whose objective is to reduce the national prison population in half by 2030. And so this year, Ronald, y'all have really been active, engaging folks nationwide to become more involved in the electoral process, and I'm hoping you can tell folks about that.
A couple of the projects that we have going this year to address that is voting rights. We're trying to do the voting restoration rights for people that's been formerly incarcerated, as well as we're doing a legislative push around the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic situation in our jails and prisons around the country. And we currently are operating a event in Kentucky around restoring the voting rights for Kentuckians. There are recently 175,000 people in Kentucky got their rights restored to vote. And their votes is critical in this election cycle.
They deserve to participate in our great democracy. By taking this step, by restoring these voting rights, we declare that everyone counts in Kentucky. We all matter.
And we believe that, exercising that right to vote isn't just as simple as showing up to the polls. Because what happened in Kentucky after those 175,000 people had their voting rights restored, the legislature went and they closed all the polling places. There's only one polling place in the size of the city of Louisville now. And there's a lot of other places around the state that don't have adequate access to polling. So we are trying to get those people registered, get them to vote, and get them to show up. This might be one of the most important elections in the country this year in Kentucky. We also believe that those closer to the problem are closer to the solution. So we want to make sure that the people participate in the voting process, they become part of the solution.
Well, that's all incredible work that y'all are doing at Just Leadership, Ron, and we're immensely grateful for you. And, none of us are more grateful, in fact, than our new Reframing Justice organizer at AFSC Arizona. That would be Enrique Olivares-Pelayo. And Enrique, thanks so much for being here. We're all so thankful to have your energy and your experience leading our efforts to mobilize directly impacted people all over Arizona. And as someone who, with a conviction history, you just very recently, like real recently, had your voting rights restored. In fact, I believe all your civil rights restored. And what I'm hoping is that you can go ahead and share that experience with folks who are watching this, especially those who, like me, in fact, are still disenfranchised even after incarceration, after with our conviction history, and share the experience of what it was like to get your rights restored.
So my experience, like the experience of many folks that I've talked to, was confusing, stressful, and complicated. I thought that I had lost my rights permanently. I adopted an attitude of cynicism, and politics didn't matter to me. Once I found out that there was, in fact, an opportunity to get my rights restored, the opposite happened. I thought that they had been restored to me automatically as somebody who had only served one prison sentence. I thought that that meant that I had had my rights restored. Come to find out, that's not what it means to be a first-time offender. I have multiple felony convictions on my record, and therefore I had to apply to the Superior Court to have my rights restored. This process was not easy to navigate, especially in a time where the court themselves are closed and there's not somebody to answer the phone or answer questions. So a lot of navigating on links and websites that seem to go in loops that lead to nowhere, and educating myself as far as who needed to receive my documentation, what that process looked like. I'm very grateful now to be somebody who has his rights restored, not only his right to vote, but also his right to serve on a jury, his right to hold publicly elected office, and in Arizona, even his right to, exercise his Second Amendment and own a firearm. Those rights were restored to me through appealing to the Superior Court that sentenced me. It's called a petition for restoration, and that document is available online. It's just not particularly easy to find.
Well, we'll try to do our best to link to some of those online resources that folks should be able to find below, above the comments section. And so thanks for sharing that experience, Enrique. So Ron, you have your own experience with the system, and I know that you're really familiar with the rights restoration process all over the country, at least, in the states where folks can actually restore their voting rights. And I'm hoping that you, could tell us a little about the process in Kentucky, where Just Leadership has been working so hard this year to help folks restore their voting rights, to get out the vote, and in New York State, where Just Leadership is based.
Let me go back just a little bit and give a little bit more history by myself. I'm originally from Michigan, and I served 27 years in the Department of Corrections in Michigan on a wrongful conviction. My conviction was overturned. I went to prison in 1985. My conviction was overturned in 2012, and I was subsequently released. Michigan has a whole different platform. A felony conviction for a violent offense, you cannot have your rights to own a firearm restored. However, your voting rights in Michigan are automatically restored once you get out of prison or jail. And all you have to do is go to the Secretary of State's office and fill out the paper. You can vote right away. They give you a registration card and you can go vote. So Michigan is not one of the states where voting is an issue. Some of the other issues are a problem. And Enrique pointed out, owning the rights for restoration. But one of the things that we kind of discovered in our work at Just Leadership is that restoring the vote to persons leaving jails and prisons actually aids their transition back into community life. We found the revocation of voting rights compounds the isolation of formerly incarcerated people from their communities. And Enrique touched on that, how he felt disconnected and disjointed, and he got cynical because of it. And we read a study, according to the Columbia Human Rights Law Review study, among individuals who have been formerly arrested and previously incarcerated, 20% of non-voters were rearrested, compared with 12% of people who had their voting rights restored. Although, the data, the limitations of the data is, precludes direct causation, but it's clear that voting rights appears to be part of the package of a pro-social behavior that is linked to distance from crime. So, restoring people's voting rights is important more than just for, obtaining your full citizenship back, but actually social reacclimation in the society. And as far as Kentucky, and I say Kentucky, they have disenfranchisement law. So you go to prison or jail in Kentucky for felony conviction, they take your right to vote. And you have to go through this whole process of voter rights restoration just to get them back. And that's part of the process we got going. New York, once you get out of jail in New York, it's the same as Michigan. Your voting rights are restored once you go and reapply.
So, the last time I voted was from jail. It was in 2008. I hadn't been convicted of the charges against me at that time. And so I was still eligible to vote, even from jail. And, I remember that after more than a year by that time in pretrial detention, voting really energized me. It made me feel engaged, made me feel seen, like I mattered. And until my rights are restored next year, should happen in March, cross your fingers. I know that I'm probably going to continue to feel like an other. I'm wondering what it was like for you, Enrique, upon having your voting rights restored.
I think that one of the things that I noticed when I received that document stating that I had all of my civil rights restored was a sense of wholeness and reintegration that I didn't even consciously know was missing. So if you'd have asked me the day before I received those documents, do you feel like a whole person? Are you a proud citizen of the United States? Do you believe that your country is a great place to live? I would have answered in the affirmative, even with everything I've been through. I would have said, yes, I am a proud American citizen. I do believe that we live in a great country. And yes, I do feel whole. I hadn't even been aware of the fact that I'd been maimed, that something had been taken from me. I wasn't even conscious of the fact that I was not a full citizen of my country. And to have that restoration and to see a piece of paper saying that my birthright had been restored to me was a deeply moving experience. It was emotionally impactful. And it's not something that I wouldn't have admitted it, that it was even lacking. Right? So I didn't even know what I was missing, essentially, is what I'm talking about. And that attitude of what I think doesn't matter because I can't vote anyway is gone, right? Which leaves me with two things: a profound sense of freedom and a sense of responsibility, personal responsibility, to engage, to care, to educate myself, to advocate for causes that matter to me. I think that it is profoundly dehumanizing to disenfranchise people after they've committed a felony. I think that it is a systemically racist policy meant to perpetuate white supremacy. I think that it is something that is immediately actionable as far as restoring equity and helping communities of color advocate for themselves at the legislative and federal levels. Getting rid of prisons, I'll be the first to admit it's a stretch. Helping people get their rights back to vote, okay, now we're talking. Now we're talking about something that we can do right now.
Ron, how about you?
Being a Black person, specifically a Black man in America, it's almost, in reality, it's almost impossible to feel totally, enfranchised as a citizen, because our rights are restricted from the beginning. We live in a state of perpetual restriction of rights. If you go back to the history of Blacks in America, that once the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, there were still a lot of other things in effect that kept us from being full citizens. And they had to pass constitutional amendments to make us full citizens. When the Constitution was first written, blacks weren't even considered to be persons to be included in the Constitution. So they passed these amendments to make us citizens, and they still, the enforcement of, as you guys know, is spotty at best. We know the 13th Amendment gives us this citizenship. However, in cases of servitude or prison, they take your rights again as full citizenship. And the voting rights for blacks weren't instituted until 1965, the Voting Rights Act. And it has to be re-voted on every so many years. So we still have that tentative connection to full citizenship. I feel like I'm a full citizen, yes, but I feel a whole lot of oppression and restriction due to this inherent systemic racism that is built on the foundation of white supremacy. There's no getting around it. I mean, it's ubiquitous. It's like the air. It's all around you. You sense it and you don't sense it. It's there. It affects you, and it affects everything that you can do as far as a citizen. But as Enrique pointed out, restoration of our voting rights is an immediate thing that we can do to help alleviate some of the inherent oppressions that we've suffered over the years. Even though closing prisons may seem like a stretch, it's not as big a stretch as it seems. Because if you look at the parole policies across the country, there are a lot of people past their minimum mild age right now. When I left prison in Michigan, there were 17,500 people that had served their minimum sentences, but were still in prison, although there are only 35 people in the prison population. If you'd have cut those people loose, you'd have cut that population in half overnight. And it's like that all across the country. So our goal of half by 2030 is certainly reachable.
Whether you have your rights restored or not, whether you can vote today or not, one thing's certain. These folks that we elect, whenever it is that we find out who won, they're going to let us down. They're probably going to let us down. They're probably going to break their promises. They're going to protect themselves and the status quo. And I'm wondering what you guys think, what can we do? How should we respond?
Oh, that's a great question, Joe. And thanks for asking that. Because as you was talking, I was thinking about, the restoration of the voting rights of the people in Florida. We were part of that process, Proposition 4, dealing with the restoration of 1.5 million, the voting rights to 1.5 million people. And the legislative response to that was, they went back and passed a law, the Republicans passed a law that the people rights restored had to pay all their fines and fees from prison before they could actually vote in the elections, which amounts to a poll tax. It's being fought and appealed. But right now, most of those people won't be able to vote in the upcoming election, which is as we both all know, that's one of the most important in history. And it's hard to kind of say, even though the voting process is flawed and we know the candidates are flawed, but the reason the whole system and the candidates are flawed because the people that participate are flawed. Look at what's going on around our country. You have half the country saying that COVID-19 is not an issue. We shouldn't socially distance and we shouldn't wear a mask. That is preposterous. The scientists are telling you the fact that it's a dangerous disease. 225,000 people have died from it in the last 8 months, and the people still don't believe that it's real. So we have a mindset in this country to believe what's convenient and expedient instead of what's rational and what's real. So, voting has consequences. The people we elect to these offices have consequences. They may or may not keep their promises, but in living in the Black community, we know that they almost never keep their promises. For us, it's been a historical process of voting for the lesser of two evils. That's what it comes down to. Who's going to screw you over the least? Because they are going to screw you over. Yeah. And so we just come to the conclusion, we just have to vote for the person that's going to screw us over the least until we can raise people from our communities, Black and brown and all communities, with the social justice lens, and raise them to be responsible and people with integrity who keep their promises and run for the right reasons instead of personal reasons or for reasons to appease ideology. So I'm thinking that one way to go, but until we get there, we just have to keep, being mindful. We have to teach our young people to be responsible leaders and be self-reflective and to invest in the leadership of others.
Enrique?
I think that it is a logical fallacy to wait for elected officials to enact policies that will benefit the community. I think that the way that the system is designed to work is that our representatives enact legislation that is fueled and propelled by civic engagement and by the wishes of their constituencies. Now, that's the way that it's designed to work. That might not necessarily be the way that it works because of a systematic process of making people not care about what's going on Capitol Hill. People, and this is not an indictment on individuals, but I will say that it is a critique on the current status of the American electorate. We are asleep. We do not care, like writ large, right? But what I'm seeing on university campuses, what I'm seeing in grassroots efforts to help people and meet them where they're at, is that we're waking up. And it is, as any wake up, uncomfortable and requires energy, and it requires discipline, and it requires an effort on the people that are already awake to be patient while people are coming to realize the gravity of the situation. I think that one of the perils of this kind of work is a feeling of frustration and jadedness, right? Because we've known, we see it, and it's almost as though people who have different opinions than us are like belligerently ignorant, like they are willfully closed-minded, or somehow it almost defies belief that they could subscribe to the beliefs that they hold, right? That is not a way to mutually engage. That is not a way. So as taxing as it is, it's my belief that it requires us to once again be the bigger people, to continue to educate and meet them where they're at, right? I did a lot of work with harm reduction. That's the sort of outlaw assistance of people who use drugs outside of the scope of rehabilitation and 12-step and all of the things that we impose on people who get in trouble for having the disease of addiction, right? So when it comes to harm reduction, imagine, right, that you are talking to an intravenous drug user. Are you going to tell them what you're doing is wrong, you are bad, you are hurting yourself, you are hurting others, or are you going to offer them equipment so that they can do what they are doing in a way that harms less, right? One is a moral opinion, and the other is fact-based best practices that scientifically reduce the spread of HIV, overdose, hepatitis C, and wounds caused by dirty drug injection equipment. So I can take a moral stance that gets nothing done, or I can do my best to help people, even though I find what they're doing difficult to watch, hard to believe, painful. And that requires an open-mindedness and a willingness to accept that, like, people that have opinions that directly hurt them and others benefit immensely from education, patience, tolerance, and respect. I don't believe that 100 million Americans are overtly, consciously racist. It is my belief that they have been duped and that they have been sold a bill of goods that makes them feel emotionally comforted that their identity matters. That is not difficult for me to comprehend. I like it when my existence is validated and when I feel like I matter, right? The fact that a charlatan has taken advantage of people is not the fault of the people that it's my job to go reach and interact with and communicate with.
So, hey, y'all, let's say that my worst fears, whatever my worst fears are, I'm speaking generally, are realized when I wake up tomorrow morning, or whenever it is that we know the results of this election. anybody watching that one candidate or that one ballot proposition that they were really hoping would pass. It ends up failing. What should they do? How do we pick ourselves up in this terrible year of terrible years?
Well, first, I'd like them to do a body check and make sure that they still have their head attached to their shoulders with the limbs that they had the night before, right? Because it's not the worst thing that could happen, right? I want them to go into the other room, make sure that their family's still awake, alive, and breathing, and take stock of the fact that it's not the worst thing that could happen, right? What it is 4 years more of an all-out assault on democracy. Now, any history book with a democracy will tell you that these happen and that they are scary and that we are living in times of incredible importance. But what we are not living through is the apocalypse. Okay, you can tell because you're listening to this podcast instead of dead. Right. So while there is breath in our bodies, it is our responsibility to take stock, focus on the positives, and see what can be done. It is my belief that on a Wednesday morning where the worst has happened and this administration has been reelected, there will be up and down the ballot massive strides towards positive change. It might be in a local Senate race, it might be in a congressional race, but there will be a shift politically in this country on the day after tomorrow. There is not that fatalistic sense of we are doomed plays directly into the hands of the administration, who wants us to feel like resistance is futile and who wants us to surrender our will to political action and just give up and let them take this country wherever it is they want it to go, right? So we can double down, we can insist on more manifestations, more long walks down downtown boulevards, more resistance until a critical mass is reached. It's my belief that everything happens for a reason. That might not be shared by all of our listeners, but 4 more years of overt anger and resistance towards this administration might be exactly what America needs. It's not for me to say, right? 4 more years of people waking up and seeing what kind of resentment exists towards this white supremacist, mass incarcerating state might shift the pendulum farther than any current Band-Aid on a bullet hole, right? Who knows? Maybe America needs to see 4 more years of this toxic racism in order to really wake up and take its medicine.
No matter what happens, I mean, for me, in the morning after the election or the day after the election, I would encourage everybody to just take a deep breath and take a chill pill, because we've been through worse. We're going to go through other stuff. So no matter what happens, we're going to continue on. My daily mantra, every moment I get up, I have a saying that I say to myself: I am a vital force among forces, and I refuse to be the victim of a prearranged destiny. I'm going to get up there next morning. I'm going to say my mantra. I'm going to employ everybody around me to do the same, people I know and love. I'm going to reach out to them, encourage, hey, this, whatever happens, it's not the end of the world, whether it's before us or against us. It's not the end of the world. Just pick up your cross, bear your cross, and keep pushing forward.
Thanks again to both Ronald Simpson-Bey from JustLeadershipUSA and our new ReFraming Justice organizer, Enrique Olivares-Pelayo. Thanks so much to both of them for joining us today on Election Day. Before you go, one last thing. I want to give you all some practical things to do to affect change in your community if either you cannot vote today or you justifiably are not voting because you don't trust the process. So let's start with those who want to vote but can't. First, lots of people don't drive, especially those who are elderly or disabled. you can offer those folks who share your values a ride to their polling location today. Another thing, second, what you can do is amplify your choices on social media as if you can vote, because your voice does matter no matter what the state tells you. For those of you who hate the electoral process, organize those marches and those protests that are going to elevate the issues that are important to you. We still need that. Volunteer for organizations and agencies doing the work that politicians won't do. Use your privilege to open doors for those who don't have that privilege, and then get out the way. And finally, this goes for everyone. Take care of yourself. Exercise, eat right, find some quiet time, unplug the devices whenever you can. So those are just some of the things that I think all of us can do, even if we're not participating in the process. Have your boundaries, right? And so on that note, that is all for this episode of Reframing Justice. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the AFSC Arizona channel. Get out the vote, y'all. Today is really important. And I can't vote, but I'm gonna take care of myself right now. I'm gonna go for a walk.